Here we go. All right, so I think all of you know, and if not, I'm about to tell you that here in the state of New York, we have an exciting bond act for the environment coming onto the ballot this November. And I'm here on behalf of the Vote Yes for Clean Water and Jobs Coalition with my LCV hat on, where we're very subtly pushing for advocacy to get the bond act passed. The bond act is called the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Bond Act, which is a ballot measure that will be on the ballot for voters to decide on this November 8th. If it's passed, it's going to provide funding to protect water and improve public health, to address flooding, to protect our environment, and to improve quality of life in every part of the state. We believe that it's going to be on the back of the ballot, depending on where you are. In most places in the state, it's going to be on the back of the ballot. We have done a study that expects that the Bond Act will generate about 100,000 local family-sustaining jobs, which requires for certain projects prevailing wages to be paid. Actually, in all projects, prevailing wages to be paid, but on some projects to also require project labor agreements. And critically, there's an investment of 35% of the funds have to go to disadvantaged communities, so that we make sure that we're helping those communities that are on the front lines, that have been overburdened by pollution for too many years, which are very often communities of color and low-income communities. So that is really an important component baked into the Bond Act that's out there. And it's in sort of a bunch of different things that it's going to do. We know first and foremost, it's going to protect clean drinking water. We just heard from Aileen, and you guys all know it anyways, the 17 million people rely on your community for water. So this is a way we can help to make sure that we're protecting our drinking water. We want to make sure that we're modernizing our infrastructure and revitalizing the economy. So that is something that is really front and foremost. And we know that there's been a big investment, or there is a big investment coming down from Congress that will help us to realize that. And we know that investing in environmental projects results in about $7 of return of local revenue for every $1 that's invested. So that's really a fantastic return on investment. We know it's going to improve public health and safety by reducing pollution, protecting people from flooding, and to make sure that we're putting ourselves into a better position. And then last, it's going to help us conserve our natural resources, which we all know in this community how important that is, not just for a way of life, but for tourism and the economy. The Bond Act breaks down into 4 big buckets of funds. This is not like the 1996 Bond Act, which was the last time we did a Bond Act for the environment. That Bond Act listed specific projects that were going to get funded. This one does not. This one includes buckets that will then require local governments and not-for-profits to apply for grant funding. So there's $650 million at least that's available for water quality and for water infrastructure. There's $650 million available for open space conservation and recreation. There's $1.1 billion available for restoration and flood risk reduction, and there's $1.5 billion available for climate change mitigation. So those are sort of the big tranches of funds that are out there. I've already mentioned that the investment in environmental justice, but based on the amount of money there is, it would be about $1.4 billion for disadvantaged communities. So a little bit more on the flavor of the types of projects that could be funded from the water quality funding is that there's money in there for municipal stormwater projects. We know stormwater is a big cause of flooding for our communities, as well as can run off from stormwater can cause pollution that impairs our drinking water and our recreational waterways. So this is a really big investment in stormwater infrastructure and stormwater projects. So we're really excited about that. There's hundreds of millions of dollars available for wastewater infrastructure upgrades and repairs. So that could be, sewering in certain areas, but it certainly could be, upgrading and replacing septic systems and other infrastructure. There's also funding that would be available to help support reducing runoff from farms and improving soil health, reducing harmful algal blooms and water pollution, as well as replacing lead lines, because there are still lead pipes that are out there. So certainly in the the Delaware River Basin, this is an area we know that there's flooding associated with more intense storms. And so having more funding for this type of stormwater will certainly be helpful for the community. On open space and recreation, this is exciting. It's really labels more sort of investment in making sure that our parks are up to snuff, that there's funding available. There's $75 million for fish hatcheries. That predominantly, I think, will go towards upgrading the state's fish hatcheries, which supports an over $1 billion economic tourism economy for upstate New York. I know how important the trout fishery is for the Delaware River. Certainly that's where a lot of people come and a lot of folks make money. And so that is really important to help us support the fishing community in the state of New York, as well as some funding for conservation easements for willing landowners and sellers. There could be funding for some land acquisition, but that will again be probably limited. That'd be more for the state to do that, and farmland preservation. So this is really another down payment in protecting and making sure that our parks are protected and invested in. For climate change mitigation, there's funding available for greening our public buildings, including state-owned buildings, SUNY and CUNY, public schools, so that they can go green and be more energy efficient, for electric school buses, for reducing air pollution in environmental justice communities, for urban heat, less of an issue up there, but also for protecting natural and working lands, and collecting methane pollution from agriculture. So those are some of the climate mitigation categories. For flood risk reduction, there is some funding for coastal rehabilitation, shoreline restoration, but there's additional funding for reducing inland flooding and revitalizing waterfronts. So we know that clearly inland flooding is of concern in the area, having been through Lee and Irene, to a lesser degree Sandy. And then of course we're expecting more intense storms as we move forward, as the waters warm and as the climate warms. So certainly that's something that's really important. And there is some funding that's available for proactive buyouts of structures that are located in floodways. This would not be eminent domain. This would be for willing sellers, but people who are at high risk of being flooded out, rather than having to wait until the storm comes and devastates an area. There could be some buyouts in certain regions where it makes sense, rather than having to be at risk of being flooded over and over again. But there's also funding that will be available for restoring natural areas and wildlife habitat, including wetlands and streams and forests. And of course, protecting our roads and infrastructure by raising them, by right-sizing culverts, by addressing those areas that are flooded, flood prone, there we go. So that's really exciting that we have a tranche of money that will enable us to do that. As I mentioned, we expect this could generate about 84,000 jobs, nearly 100,000 jobs. And we're expecting that this will result in about $8.7 billion in economic activity, which we think will really help to jumpstart the state's economy. We have a coalition that's been working to educate the public using paid advertisements and digital media. We have a lot of earned media activities. We're doing a lot on digital. We have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on @NYBondAct. So we encourage you to follow us and get more information about the campaign and about the Bond Act that's coming up. We have some ads that are pretty funny. Let's see if I can get one to play. Maybe.
There isn't much from 1922 still in use today. We don't play music from this, ride a bike like this, or write emails with this. But too many New York homes get drinking water from the same infrastructure as in 1922. This fall, vote yes on Proposition 1, the Environmental Bond Act, to replace lead pipes and upgrade failing water infrastructure. This fall, vote yes for clean water. Paid for by Vote Yes for Clean Water and Jobs.
We try to be a little funny. We also comment that we need to get our infrastructure to be an A grade. We have materials if people are interested in them, including palm cards that are both in English and Spanish, as well as yard and window signs. that we're using to just help raise awareness about the Bond Act. And of course, we've been doing earned media as well. I'm actually going to be on a program later today. This is my second of 3 discussions with folks about the Bond Act today, and it's been pretty regular for me and a number of other folks, but certainly we're trying to help educate as many people as possible about what's going on. And of course, we want to make sure that people are aware of the steps in order to vote on this, making sure that people are registered to vote, which you have to be registered by October 14th in order to vote in this year's election, to make sure that you've changed your address if you need to do that by next week. And of course, making sure that you're coming out to vote early. Early voting is October 29th through November 6th. Or if you want to vote on election day itself, it's November 8th. By the way, I personally vote early. There's no lines. It's super easy. You get it done and you don't miss that. And there's 10 days in which you can do that. So you're not in a rush on that last day. So there's no excuses anymore. So we hope you'll join us. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but we want people to vote yes. We want people to make sure your registration is up to date, and take a pledge to vote yes and follow us on social media. So that's all I have in that. I'm going to stop sharing. Nope, I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. So it's a high level overview. We don't know what all the funding will go for specifically because, again, the agencies that are in charge of the dollars will put out grant proposals once the Bond Act has passed, assuming it passes, and then we'll be able to see which projects get awarded. But it'll be a competitive grant process for most of the funding that goes to local governments and to not-for-profits.
Awesome. We still have a few minutes if anybody has any questions for Julie.
Hey, Julie, it's Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Let's jump ahead and assume that the voters do approve it. I know your head's not there yet, but let's say that happens. Do you have any tips for us about, knowing where we are in sort of a rural area of the state that traditionally has been underrepresented in many ways? How would we gear up for, making sure that our fishery and our river get its fair share of this statewide money that now is available?
First and foremost, I would say you try to start identifying potential projects, right? You already have identified some of those in your watershed plan, right? And so start looking at what might make sense to do, what's highest priority, what is, likely to be able to get federal funding, or you already have federal funding lined up for, because I think to the extent that you have that, this is a huge plus to do that. But those are definitely key, and start identifying some partners who might be able to help support you with like a letter of support, and identify those for your elected officials, for example. But certainly we want to make sure it's like having that history of why a project is important. If an area of a stream is not right size and it's been flooding over and over again, where we've had fish kills because the water quality is not great, or communities have been impacted by flooding, that is, I think, in particular projects you want to highlight to say, this is a problem that needs fixing and it needs fixing now. So those are the kinds of things that you'd want to be focusing on. Like, are there partners that you can work with? Are you, can you do something that, helps the New York City watershed, and therefore it's, valuable from their perspective and they could be supportive of it. So I would say there's a lot of different, you want to line up the best case and the best projects to be pursuing those funding.
Great, perfect.
Other questions?
Michelle, do we have any questions in the queue, or any other questions for Julie?
We do not, and we're right about at 1:30, so it's kind of perfect timing.
Okay.
Julie, as always, you're great. Thank you very much. Good luck on your next presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening in today, and don't forget to vote.
Awesome. Thanks.
Bye.
So we talked about a state program that we just recently received funding for. Julie just talked about the potential for another state source of funding, and now Sherry's going to introduce our next speaker, and he's going to give us a lay of the land